Hey guys, well, what I thought we would cover today is when I lived in Seattle, I got a lot of questions about, to be more specific, over what I had planned as my sort of bug out action plan. So today we're going to be revisiting the video that I did years ago, which is basically the bug out route planning. And certainly the greater metro area of Seattle, highly densely populated area, has a lot of issues that you need to get over that some other places just don't have. As you can see, there's a ton of blue around Seattle, which allows for some interesting things. So with all the lakes, you have a lot of bridges, whether they be floating bridges or physical suspended bridges. Any sort of earthquake or high winds can shut those down. Simply working in downtown Seattle and living north, say in the U District or Wallingford or Ballard, you have a waterway that separates that entire portion of the northern Seattle from down here. So I-5 is a main artery that runs north and south. That has a bridge. All the smaller waterways have a bridge. So vehicles were not an easy way to get out of the city. And although I do have the bug out vehicle, I don't think that you're going to necessarily be able to count on a vehicle getting out of a city very easily. Traffic is easily going to be congested. So basically, motorcycle is a great option. A bicycle is a terrific option, and for more speed. And then in the end, you really need to count on your bag and getting out. That's why I was such a big proponent with the bug out bags. A lot of guys basically poo the idea of being able to hoof it out of an area. And this could be anything, sort of natural disasters or otherwise. But as you can see, Seattle offers, if you live south of Seattle, it's a little bit better. There aren't as many waterways that you'll have to cross. But if it is something like Rainier, you're not going to want to go south from Seattle because that is the direction of the mountain. If you do live in Tacoma, there is the Duwamish Waterways that separates West Seattle from main Seattle, and that is a great way. That will take you all the way to Tacoma. So if you had a cache or a small inflatable boat, you could put there. There's a lot of greenbelt sort of wild areas along there that you could easily stash something. But your get home bag is going to be a little bit different. If you still live in this area, you're not going to set up camp halfway between downtown and U District. It's about 12 miles, and it's something you're just going to have to push through and make it all the way there. Now, looking at the entire state of Washington, it actually is kind of a big hand. There's a huge peninsula portion here that is separated from the greater metro area of Seattle by the Puget Sound. So here is kind of the most densely populated area, which is the greater Seattle area. You have one major artery that runs north and south, which is I-5. North and south. So anything from Oregon up to Canada, primarily most people, it's I-5. To go east, you have to go over the Cascade Mountains. There is the major artery that runs I-90. You can take this all the way to New York. There is Highway 2, which is basically a two-lane highway that'll get you over there. And there's Highway 20 up north. That one is closed in the winter. If you're lucky enough to get through the Seattle area and you can get close to Rainier, Enumclaw, you can't take 410 over to Yakima. That is closed in the winter. Anyone who's been on Highway 2 on a Sunday coming back from a hiking trip in the summer knows that that is not an option. It becomes a parking lot on a simple, nice Friday afternoon. I-90 is going to be your biggest bet to get out eastbound. But again, that is easily clogged when there's enough people trying to go that way. Look at any major sporting event in Seattle, and when the weather gets bad in the mountains, ask anyone who's had to go over the I-90 area. So east may not be an option. North-south is still not a great option. If you can get just over the waterway of the Puget Sound, whether it be through Tacoma and around, or just jump across using any sort of boat. Smaller craft can use the inlet waters here much more efficient without having to be an ocean-going vessel. In that Puget Sound area, there are a ton of islands that are actual just state parks. And so you have a state park that has no real population, no real residents on that. It has deer and other amenities that you can get to, especially if you're just trying to avoid, economic collapse, or you're trying to avoid the people over anything else. A quick jaunt to some of these smaller islands is an easy way to go. Even the ones that are populated, the population is significantly less than the Seattle area. In sort of a grid down situation, the ferries won't be running. So if you have access to a boat, that would be great. One of my bug out plans, I had two good friends that had boats. One had one boat that would be good enough to get to some of these islands. The other one would be considered what you'd say a survivalist was, back before preppers even had a name called preppers. And he owned some property on the west side of Vancouver Island, and he had about 4 or 5 boats. He was a big fisherman. They weren't huge boats, nothing really ocean going, but enough to get through the sound or at least up to some of these other islands. And he had the moorage just south of Seattle that we could get to. A boat option, as long as it's not a tsunami or something that you're trying to avoid, is probably your best route in the greater Seattle area. My other friend that had the one in Seattle moored up was a sailboat. So we required very little fuel, if any, just to get out of the greater threat area. If you can get across the sound, you now have access to the Olympic National Park, which even the population that surrounds it is fairly less, small population. Olympic National Forest offers a ton of resources just to get out of the greater area. Now we talked about Mount Rainier. Mount Rainier is right here. If that is something you're preparing for, Mount Rainier or any of the other Cascade Mountains have been known. Mount Baker has a decent bulge in it they've been watching the last few years. Rainier is overdue for going. If you're in the Seattle area, going south towards that is not ideal. Now, generally, most of the winds come from the ocean. There are sometimes in the summer you have onshore flows. You definitely have to worry about the, which way that particular system is going if something like that came down with the ash impact. And many of you guys know that live in the Seattle area, they always call it the convergent zones because you have winds coming down the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and they're basically other winds are coming around the Olympics. There's such a big mountain range that then they come and they converge here. So you do have typically, from the ocean side heading east. So the winds are generally in your favor. You'd have to worry about Spokane and people that live further east, but it just depends on what you're preparing for. I will tell you that even if you're not preparing for just an emergency, we've had several winters, one in particular, where the rain was raining so hard that it flooded a general portion of I-5. There's a flat portion in here, a lowland area, and it was completely flooded. So there was no traffic coming north and south into Seattle. It's the middle of winter, and that same system that was bringing all that moisture that flooded I-5 was turning to snow in the mountains. So I've already talked about that these two passes are closed in the winter. That left you with 2 and 90, and they were both closed due to avalanche danger. So we were completely isolated from any sort of resupply. The general stores, the grocery stores, it wasn't a dire situation because it didn't last long enough. They were able to clear up the mountains way before the flooding here was gone. So there was able to get supplies, but you did start running low. Some people started running out of, certain premium fuels and things like that. Many gas stations were not able to resupply. At least the really popular ones that are close to exits and stuff like that started running out of fuel. Now at that point, they finally got the resupply and it was fine. But just that little winter storm that came in completely isolated geographically the greater Seattle area, and you've got millions of people that live in there. And if it had lasted any longer, look at the Hurricane Sandy. Imagine the Seattle area without the amenities that they have over there for weeks and months now from what they're dealing with. So certainly the resupply can get in, but if something were to happen that were a landslide permanently closed I-90, you've got 2 which can easily get so much snow that they have to close it just for the snow itself, let alone an avalanche slide. And you've got the possibility of high moisture coming in and flooding out the Chehalis lowland area through there. So you'd be limited. I will tell you that, your bug out by backpack is usually one of your last plans. My plan Z was to extricate myself, if the boats were not an option, to get up into the Cascades, hopefully through Enumclaw, closer to Rainier, and get to the Pacific Crest Trail and use the resources that is the Pacific Crest Trail, Oregon, Washington, and get myself down to Oregon. The Pacific Crest Trail would get me very close to Central Oregon, and from there, I'd be out of the evacuation zone. That is over a 400-mile trek, And it is not an easy thing to do without resupply. So if you guys remember back, I did a video called, I think, Wandering the Northwest. I'll find it and put a link up there. You saw pictures of Mount St. Adams and Mount St. Helens and Rainier and stuff. What I was doing was taking out my caches that I had all along the Pacific Crest Trail on the foothills near the Cascades that I would have used, and that was in preparation of coming down to Oregon. Now that I'm down here, a bug out plan is completely different. And to those of you that you guys, again, sort of poo-poo the idea of grabbing a bag and going, some of you will always talk about the herds from the city. Do you know how many people in the city wouldn't have a clue where to go or what to do, or you know, it would be days before they would be dead. They would not be herds finding your way into the rural areas. I honestly guarantee it. And again, you know, you talk about route planning. It is so different no matter where you go. It is completely different being on the east side of the Cascades in Oregon than completely different being at one state over and just on the, you know, other side of the Cascades in Washington. Let alone the East Coast versus West Coast. I'll put up a photo here. It's a recent photograph of a NASA satellite picture of the U.S. at night, and that gives you an idea, a very easily, you know, recognizable idea of population density, the amount of electricity used at night to light cities and roadways and everything else. If you look at the East Coast, I do not envy you, because those of you that are usually saying it's ridiculous to think you're going to grab a bug out bag and be able to go out is because look at your population density. It is crazy packed with people. Same again, if you're looking to avoid a certain area and you're huffing it out by foot, yeah, you're probably going to run into a bunch of other people and private property and owners that are trying to protect that property. Look at the West. How many lights do you see out there? Not many. We still have very unpopulated wild areas in the Western United States. So if you're living on the East Coast and you're telling me that if I grab my bug out bag and some farmer's going to shoot me or whatever, it's not fact over here on the West. Everything is going to be different and dictated by your situation, and the fact that you have to be able to adapt to get through all that, you know, your plans may go completely out the window and you have to be prepared to change to meet the current condition. But again, I'm blabbing on. I kind of did the same thing with the previous route planning video. It's not rocket science, guys. Get some maps, look at population density, look at routes, find out what they are in the winter. Seattle was a little bit difficult because their watershed areas are blocked off, so many of the available forest roads will have gates on them, so it hinders your progress in doing any sort of a mock bug out run. Certainly in a grid down situation, you can probably get past those gates. But they do a terrific job about protecting all of these waterways in the foothills of the Cascades. They're watershed areas. They've got nets over lakes so birds can't get them, and they really keep a really good, high quality water supply that Seattle enjoys. So not to say that the aging pipes that it all goes through is as quality, but a lot of the roadways that they have a vast network of roads up there can be gated so that any sort of mock bug out plan would be, you know, quelled pretty quick without you doing something illegal. But yeah, this is Beast signing off. Thanks for watching, guys.